I also have one in my lungs, and it works double time. All right, so I mentioned in the beginning how we were kind of taking, chronologically, we're going backwards, right? So we started, United Hebrew and then going into U City. That's kind of the jumping off point to West County, right? And the movement of a community out west, and which mimics, population movement in St. Louis, period, in the later part of the 20th century and continuing. And so now we've moved from U City, now we're really close to Wellston. So the Wellston Loop area is not very far from here. I've given, recently for a large group of different Jewish organizations, we did a bus tour crisscrossing Black history and Jewish history in St. Louis. And Wellston is a place where that really blends in an interesting way because of that population movement, how those things combine. And that's going to be kind of a theme that connects this stop and our next stop as well. So just kind of giving you an orientation of where you are. You are northwest, kind of downtown. And again, the Wellston Loop is headed out this way, so this would be an area just a few streets over, a major shopping district at the same level of Cherokee Street in the south of St. Louis, 14th Street pedestrian mall in Old North St. Louis. These were major shopping districts when the bulk of the population lived in the city of St. Louis. So now, just to put that in context, I'm going to pass this over to Warren. And you're in Trojan Park. This is a very new park, a new partnership park here. So that just kind of also orientate you where you are physically. Here you go.
So if the last stop was about diversity within the Jewish community, this is about living with diversity in the larger community, Jews and their neighbors. And a lot of you probably know this already, but between 1936 and 1968, 98% of federal home loans went to white people. 98% of federal home loans went to white people. This effectively meant that white flight was really being subsidized. And if the federal home loans wasn't enough, there was also, of course, the building of the highways and all of the infrastructure funded very often by the government to encourage the suburban outflows. The result of this is that neighborhoods like Wellston and here Etzel going where we're going to be riding farther east were left without opportunities for investment. There were not the kinds of home loans were not available to fix up old houses, and I'm sure a lot of you know how incredibly expensive it is to fix up a 100-year-old brick house. And basically, it was just this it was really encouraging this just incredible outflow of people starting already in the 40s and then accelerating in the 50s, 60s, 70s. The result, one major result of this is that Jewish landlords, Jewish business owners, of whom there were a lot, that was kind of a lot of these Jews, whether Eastern European or German, when they came to St. Louis, this was what they knew how to do. A lot of them didn't speak English well. They would start their own business, a little grocery shop. They'd maybe get into wholesaling. But they were very often kind of, working dependent in a symbiotic relationship with their neighborhood. But they were really kind of losing their economic foundation in as much as, middle class, upper middle class people were fleeing out to the suburbs. And just to focus on landlords for a second, Jewish landlords. So even this term, Jewish landlord, is just an incredibly fraught topic. Whether you're talking about Germany before the rise of Hitler, or some Russian areas in the Pale of Settlement, Jewish landlords was very often almost kind of a term that was used readily by anti-Semites to talk about people being exploitative, talk about people being cruel, the fact that, the myth that Jews were loyal to their own and felt a moral obligation to fellow Jews, but didn't feel that obligation towards their tenants. That's a really difficult thing to talk about because there's so many layers of anti-Semitism to that discourse. But the grain of truth in it, at least talking about Wellston, talking about these points farther east, is that there were a lot of Jewish landlords. And they were stuck in this situation where they had to see what they could get in their rents was really plunging, because so many of the middle class families were heading out to the burbs. And as it turned out, a lot of the people who then were coming in and renting were African American. And that particularly grows bigger with the steamrolling of Mill Creek Valley, The end of Mill Creek Valley pushed a lot of black families into Wellston, into here. And so you had African American tenants coming into a situation with Jewish landlords, and very often the money was not there to invest, making sure that these places were good, wholesome apartments with, without infestations, with working plumbing, with, without mold. And as you probably also know, this was could be a pretty corrupt environment as well, and city inspectors were willing to look the other way. And so you have a lot of people who end up getting the label slumlord. And I'm trying in saying this to deflect, again, to not make this so much of a moral issue, right? Because it's easy to see this as, they were the slumlord, bad person who's living off the backs of other people. I think we do have to understand the situation, which is the incredible disinvestment. And this was and I also want to make clear that this was a really wrenching issue for the Jewish community. I had a conversation with Richard Barron, who is a real kind of heroic figure in St. Louis. He's the leader of McCormick Barron, builder of affordable housing around St. Louis, also nationwide. And he described a meeting that had been called at Temple Israel by the assistant rabbi to talk about this problem of these Jewish landlords and the disinvestment and the complaints that were now in 1968, 1969 leading to a huge rent strike, which Richard Barron himself, at that point he was still a legal aid lawyer, was involved with. And so they were going to have this huge meeting at the synagogue with all these Jewish landlords, many of whom were members of Temple Israel, a synagogue at that point on Washington Avenue in the Central West End. And Richard himself was going to come, and at the last minute he came and literally was barred from entering. And Richard also happens to be Jewish, but he was barred from entering the synagogue because these landlords really that was a step too far. They didn't want this wild-eyed radical who was so sympathetic to the tenants that he was supporting a rent strike, to be coming in and engaging in this discussion. So there's both sides of the issue here. On the one side, the rabbi, I knew this was a sensitive topic. On the one side, a rabbi who cares enough to call this meeting. On the other hand, landlords who are powerful enough to keep a major public activist from being there. As we go east, as Amanda said, we're kind of going back into Jewish history in the sense that we're going back into neighborhoods that were majority Jewish, in some cases 90% Jewish, going to be ending up at a high school that at one point was 98% Jewish. So we're going kind of back into Jewish history, and you might just keep in mind the ways in which history then played out in terms of the dramatic shifts in this community and all of the kinds of problems and tensions and challenges that we can't talk about in terms of two very different communities, African Americans moving west, Jews left over in a sense from the great out-migration, living together side by side and dealing with some really serious puzzles, some real conundrums in terms of how to live with each other.
Let's go.